Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Pretty Suited Podcast where we discuss development through a cultured lens. I am your host, Lauren A., and I am happy to see y'all. It's been a minute, as always. I have been pretty busy these past few weeks. As you can see, I got a new do. It's giving very 70s vibes, but that's cool. I just wanted to do something different. Everything has been changing recently, including if you have not seen already, I have been promoting my books through my company, LLM Publishing. So if you are a healthcare professional or know somebody who is a healthcare professional, somebody who's a nursing student, a medical assistant student, or even a medical student, I would suggest that you go into the description of this video and click on that link to purchase some really cool and creative study materials to help them get through their program and afterwards. I have puzzles, books, I have templates, study guides, all the things. So just click on the link in the description for LLM Publishing. It'll take you to the Amazon site so that you can publish your books. Most of them are hard copies, so you will have physical copies as opposed to just PDFs. So check that out. So other than that, other than me kind of like launching that piece of everything, I've been visited by a few friends and a few family from out of town. So they've been coming in and staying with me. It's been pretty busy, but I've enjoyed their company actually. It's kind of been good to see people outside of their element and they're coming into my element. So I'm getting to show them around and all that good stuff. So, but one of the things that's happened this past weekend actually that I was like, okay, I got to make a video about this is just the movie featuring Halle Bailey, and let me get this guy's name right. His name is Jean Page, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's how you pronounce his name. It's Reg Jean, or maybe Rejon Page. I believe that's how you say it. But anyways, it's featuring him and Halle Bailey in a movie called You, Me, and Tuscany. And I wasn't really quite interested in seeing it at first because I felt that it was just like a little too cheesy for me. I'm not going to hold you, but I feel like in the past week or so, if you have not been watching the news, you may have missed that there has been a significant number of violence towards women, particularly femicides, where actual death and murder is happening towards women. There's been reports of different kind of sexual assault cases for domestic violence, domestic assault, things of that nature. So it's just been a very, very tough month for women all across the country, all across the world, where women have been kind of been attacked by their partners or intimate partner violence. And it's just been really, really heavy on social media. And we want to make sure that we're highlighting these cases so that way awareness happens, and that way, there is some, hopefully, a chance of some legislation or just awareness processes, resources in place, maybe even just as a story, so that way somebody else who may be facing similar things feels inspired or empowered to get away with the right amount of support, because it's difficult. It is difficult, and those situations should not be taken lightly. And unfortunately, again, as they are happening in increased numbers, it has prompted other women to not only be aware, but be fearful. And rightfully so. Like, I mean, there's just been increased conversation just the past few years about the difference between men and women and just gender wars. And we keep talking about it, but it doesn't seem to be going away. And it's almost actually getting worse just based off of the discourse, right? As you increase the awareness, but so is the conversation, and so is the story sharing, and so is the dismissiveness, and so is the lack of accountability. So all these things are happening at the same time, and now we're in a space where we're like definitely afraid of each other. And to the point where divorce is going up, you have social media, and you have people just really fearful to date, just because of all the horror stories that we're reading. So with that being said, I made an intentional effort to go to the movies this weekend and see You, Me, and Tuscany just because I wanted to develop, or not to dismiss, the wrongdoings that were happening to the women in society today. And even just since the beginning of time, because this is not a new thing, but because it was being highlighted recently, I didn't want to dismiss those feelings and those experiences because they are real, and they're real for a lot of women. But I wanted to see something that would help me, will help pull me out of the guardedness and the sunkenness that I was feeling when it comes to relationships, particularly Black relationships. And so I decided to say, you know what? After church, I wanted to go and see this lighthearted movies. I've always been a sucker for a good Hallmark or a Lifetime movie where, you had the typical storyline of a busy woman, and then she meets a guy in a small town that they used to date back in high school, all the things. We know what those movies look like, especially during the holiday season. And sometimes they just are there and they're meant to pick up spirits. I mean, it's almost a formula at this point, down to the T, what is to be expected of the movie, because with the predictability of it, is actually comforting. You're not going to see bombs and things blown up, or you're not going to see any drastically heavy storylines. You're not going to see violence, or you're not going to see anything that's like outside of this well crafted genre that is a corny rom com. So that in itself is comforting. So I decided to say, okay, well, this looks like that. So let me see that on screen. And then also too, I think in the back of my brain, I have a soft spot in my heart for Halle Bailey. I feel like Halle Bailey is one of those talents that is underrated, and not because she's not exposed, because we've seen her exposure in not only the group with her sister, but also in Little Mermaid, where she received a significant amount of exposure just being a Black mermaid in a Disney film. But I think she's underexposed when it comes to her actual range. And I feel like, in this movie, she was able to provide some of that range that we've been looking for and actually wanting to see on a big screen when it comes to a Black woman in a space and a storyline that doesn't necessarily involve a significant amount of certain elements that are stereotypical of us in films. And so I feel like, Halle Bailey, she did a great job in this movie. I want to just start off and say this movie was so cute. Like, it was so cute. I mean, when I just say, I miss seeing diverse stories on film. In the 90s, I know that you guys were just like me and was a fan of the many different stories that portrayed Black and brown people on film that wasn't quite as stereotypical as we're seeing today. When I say that there were so many shows like Living Single, Martin, Parenthood, Family Matters, and so many different films from John Singleton, from Ice Cube, from Spike Lee, from Mara Brock-Akil. It just was a plethora of different directors, producers, and actors on the screen that told an array of stories that we could appreciate, relate to, and be proud of. And I feel like what has been lost today is that diversity. That diversity of story, that diversity of thought, and a diversity of exposure, so that it paints a picture of the different spectrum that is the Black and brown experience. Shout out to those who have been able to, create and capture their stories on screen, like 50 Cent and Courtney Kemp and Tyler Perry and other people who have, the fortitude to go out and create the ability to literally own studios and have networks kind of be at the helm, because they have, and they bring in such a tremendous amount of audience that they have no choice but to showcase their stuff. Like, shout out to them for doing that, for having that abundance and having that pull and that influence. However, I feel like sometimes the conversations get lost in what it is that we actually experience as a Black people, because we're not a monolith, that now people only see one type of experience. And what I enjoyed about You and Me in Tuscany was that this film in particular, it had several elements that would make quote unquote a Black film. And from down to some of the music, the soundtrack, and also some elements of the characters. I'm not going to tell the story, I don't want to give out any bloopers, but the characters themselves, they actually had some funny, hilarious Black female comedians in this film that kind of just brought that culture and element to the film. However, this movie in itself wasn't a quote unquote Black rom-com, but it added elements that made some of it more relatable. But the story itself was very, almost like I said, Hallmark, element, even Disney Channel-esque type of love story. It was very light, it was very airy, and it's almost formulaic down to how they met, how they fell in love, the bondingness over a certain thing, the cultural elements of Italy, the beautiful landscapes, like all of that is formulaic of those type of movies. And it worked. It worked because when I left that theater, I felt optimistic again. Now, is it some Oscar performances? No, maybe not. But I think that the point of the matter is that it wasn't meant to be some sort of massive or high budgeted film. It was meant to promote, in a sense, just love, which unfortunately in 2026, in the month of April, is lost. Down to from how we treat each other, from politics. We're at actually a war right now, if you guys forgot. And so just the element of love, it just seems to be lost in the sauce right now. And what this movie did, while it may be deemed as corny to some, it pacified some of the feelings that I had, those pessimistic feelings, those jaded feelings that I had, just for a brief moment. Which, if that was the measure of success, it did its job. And I appreciated it. Every treatment of a wound is not stitches. Every treatment of a wound is not a skin graft. Sometimes it's just a Band-Aid. And I think that, what this movie did, that now would I see some foolishness on my timeline tomorrow? Sure. Maybe not even tomorrow, because things are just happening so rapidly. Would I see something crazy on my timeline in 5 minutes? Maybe. But I think what was forgotten when it comes down to the arts is how important it is for people, even way back to Shakespeare and before then, in the pyramids and whatnot. People utilize arts and crafts and theater to help those people to kind of get through moments of war and famine and things like that. Because in those times, when you don't have hope, when hopelessness creeps up, you actually have more despair. You actually are more likely to have economic decline. You're actually more likely to have crime. So it is important for us to have the elements in film to, yes, tell the story of what's going on, but to also help to us escape those feelings of dread and hopelessness. And I appreciate that about this film. I appreciate that about all of the quote unquote courting films that come out, because I think that every last single one of them has a part to play. Everything's not going to be the Odyssey. Everything is not going to be a big, huge Marvel budget film. Everything is not going to be some deep thinking, Gone Girl type of film. Some films play the part that they're supposed to play, and that's okay. that's okay. Another thing I enjoyed about this film was just certain elements that kind of brought it together. I think that bringing in the Italian culture kind of helped facilitate the lightheartedness of this movie. With most films that kind of bring in the Italian culture, food is involved. And so you kind of have this element, this buffer that allows for the story to go beyond just the love story. And a lot of times in movies, food is what brings multiple cultures together. It's kind of like something that, people can agree on is either good or not good. I don't care what part of the world you're in. And so when you have that buffer, in a sense, it kind of creates more of a lightheartedness and acceptedness of other cultures. And so I appreciated that part of the movie too, because historically, there has been some tension between cultures there as well. But in this movie, it really wasn't even mentioned. It really wasn't even a focus. And that was something else that I could appreciate. So going back to, the icons and the legends of yesteryear who was able to put out such great product and such diverse stories of the Black experience, Will Packer, I found out, actually produced this movie, which makes all the sense, right? Because he's the one that came out with, Think Like a Man, Ride Along, Girls Trip. His films have been pretty much, joyous, kind of fun, comedic, types of films, which we can all appreciate. And so again, he knows his lane, that he has a direct lane. If you just think about the movies in your brain, you could kind of see like, oh, that is kind of the same kind of movie, because he has a formula of what works. I can appreciate a film, maybe having a decline and a climax, but not necessarily like a heavy burden, traumatic experience. Like, I feel like those, yes, while they're valuable because it tells a story of people's experience, some people's experience, I feel like when you add those elements to a movie just because it fits a formula, as opposed to really thinking about if this story needed it, that's where we get into trouble. Because a lot of the stories that we've seen in recent years that have those heavy moments, it wasn't needed. That extreme character wasn't needed. Somebody falling out of a coffin, that wasn't needed. Somebody, doing something real ridiculous like killing the whole family or tossing somebody, that wasn't needed. Like, so I feel like, sometimes those elements are meant to, siphon energy and siphon emotion and as for shock value. But if you really think about the story and what it entails, they weren't needed. And so I'm thankful. That this story kind of X'd that out and stuck to the plot and what it was intended to do. But there is one thing though, because as we speak about, just the fear that's coming from the current atmosphere of just women and violence towards women, it still was mentioned slightly in this film. And this is not a spoiler, because I mean, this was in the actual trailer. But as a young lady is going to Italy, her friend, who happens to be another Black woman, was kind of like, girl, you sure you want to do that? You sure you want to do that? You going over there, you might get kidnapped, you might do this, all the warnings that we find ourselves doing in situations like this, because we're afraid that us being isolated in spaces that aren't necessarily known to welcome or to, appreciate or to even revere Black American culture, then we're the ones that saying, hey, we might want to fall back and not do that, or be extra cautious and things like that. And rightfully so. So even her friend felt this way. So that wasn't missed, because, while I do say that it's a lighthearted film, there is some elements there that is still that relatable shared experience when it comes to Black people. But one thing I will say that I have noticed in Will Packer movies, this is just something I just thought about. Most of his movies, the woman ends up being the pursuer in the end to the man that she likes. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say. But I really want to unpack that. Like, I'm going to wait a couple months, wait for everybody to get a chance to see this movie, because I do want y'all to see this movie. But I really would like to unpack the whole change in the dynamic and how that's reflective of how courtship, if you want to call it that, is happening today. As women are accused of being more masculine today, and men kind of being a little bit more laid back and wanting to be pursued, that's what the social media is saying. We're seeing kind of the pattern of women either just totally removing themselves from dating or being the pursuer. So Will has kind of been highlighting that or showcasing that in his movies for a while now. So what does that say? They say art reflects life. So, I think that's an element that we need to, really look at and see, because if that's the case though, what is that kind of showing people who is entertained but yet still is seeing that as a model? What is that going to end up doing to the behavior of those that are coming up? Because what we saw was, a guy with a boombox outside of a window trying to get his girl back. That's what we saw. So as millennials began dating, that's kind of been the expectation, is the courtship and the pursuance from the man. But as the young Gen Alpha is coming up, what are they seeing as the dynamics of the male versus female relationship, and who does the courting and who does the pursuing? Because it's definitely showing in the films. It's definitely showing up in social media, which is the young person's television now, right? Like, they don't even watch actual television as we did as millennial kids. At this point, the phone is a television. So what are they seeing? What's being reflected? So I don't know. I'm just curious about that. But anyways, I really just want you guys to check it out, support Miss Halle Bailey as well as her co-star, as we just want to just see different stories on film. Why not? Like, we enough is enough of the gang person who is, shooting up stuff and causing mischief and havoc and drug, cartels and huge shipments. Like, enough is that. We've seen that story. While it may be entertaining in some capacity here and there, it doesn't need to be the only story. Let's get back to just having, more creative and diverse information and storytelling when it comes down to film and TV. So check out You, Me, and Tuscany, featuring my girl Halle Bailey. It is in theaters, or if you want to just catch it when you get on streaming, I think that's cool too. I'm probably gonna watch it again because it's so cute. I just keep saying it. It's just so cute. So anyways, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, you cannot manifest the life you feel like you don't deserve. So create the life that you want and look to the sky for grace. Bye-bye. For all that life has in store, health, culture, and more, you are pretty suited.